monster. The media has charged, tried, and convicted him. They've said nothing good to this point about Brian. And I think it's important for the public to know that he is innocent. He did not do this. It will all come out in court. That's not our place to say what we know. But he is an innocent man. He's a good man. He's a good son. He's a good brother. He's a good uncle. He's a good friend. And totally incapable of something like this.
This is my firstborn child. This is a child I've never had a problem with in my life. Not so much as a speeding ticket, anything. And all of a sudden they're out to crucify him for something that in no way on God's green earth, everybody that knows him can tell you he cannot do. He hasn't got a bad bone in his body.
There's three things here, three tragedies. Let's not minimize the fact of the victims, the people who've been shot, the murder victim. Let's not forget that in all this, okay? That's the one tragedy. The second tragedy is an innocent man is sitting in jail for that right now. He didn't do it, okay? Third tragedy is this maniac is still out there. So people better really think about it next time somebody comes up to him and talks to him about anything off the wall. He's still out there. Brian was about enforcing the law. He was a good cop. Him and I used to talk about why did we become cops. We both agreed because when we seen things like this in the paper, on the news, we couldn't just look at it, shake our head, and go, oh well. We had to do something about it. We had to confront it. And the way we confronted it was by putting our lives on the line. We agreed that that's why we became cops.
I became a cop, of course, probably like a million other cops. They want to help people. They want to do things the right way. They want to protect the innocent. They want to protect the vulnerable. That's why I became a police officer. I had a lot of people ask me why it took a year to file a lawsuit. In that year's time, I was hoping that my family would publicly be told, along with my supporters, simply we jumped the gun. When I was released, the night I was released, my lawyers told me the sheriff and the state's attorney would sit down and make me understand, me being a cop, why they did what they did, the evidence they had. A few months later, I couldn't do it immediately, obviously. A few months later, after the real offender, it was proven and he was killed, I got in touch with Dave Carlson, my lawyer, and I asked him, let's sit down. He got back to me and laughingly said, they won't talk to us, they hired lawyers. My case is a true example of don't always believe what they say, don't always jump to an opinion, let it play out. They've allowed their personal ambition to corrupt their integrity, and that's a shame. That's a real shame. If they can live with themselves and it doesn't hurt anybody else, that's your business. But then when you start hurting other people, obviously now that's my business.
Every year there are hundreds of cases of prosecutorial misconduct, false arrests, and wrongful convictions that happen in our justice system. Some prosecutors, police officials, and politicians with personal agendas call press conferences to launch inflammatory and usually false or grossly exaggerated claims about the importance of a given case, totally ignoring the facts in a rush to judgment. Examples are legion. Today, the Insider exclusive investigative TV series examines firsthand one such case in Trial by Media, Brian Dorian's story, and how Gregory Kulis at Gregory Kulis and Associates and his co-counsel, Dave Carlson at Carlson, Zelazo, Odekirk are pursuing justice against Will County Sheriff Paul Kopis, State's Attorney James Glasgow, and a sheriff's detective as defendants on behalf of Officer Brian Dorian. Officer Brian Dorian was wrongfully accused and arrested in a notorious murder case dubbed the Honeybee Shootings. Brian, a Linwood police officer, was arrested and charged in 2010 as the Honeybee Killer, who went on a 2-state shooting spree and killed 1 man. Brian's October 7, 2010 arrest was based on information that was coerced and influenced from one of the victims who was running from the killer. The victim gave a physical description of the gunman and the truck used in the shootings, which did not match Brian. The killer, later believed to be slain robber Gary Amaya, shot 2 men in Beecher, Illinois, and a third outside Lowell, Indiana in October 2010. Based on evidence including the perpetrator's gun, it was determined that Gary Amaya, who was killed, was in fact the honeybee killer. But the victim in this case was unduly influenced by the sheriff's officers and the Will County State Attorney to speculate that Brian Dorian was the gunman. Brian told officials he was on his home computer at the time the attacks took place. On October 13, 2010, charges were dropped and Brian was released from the Will County Detention Center. Brian's 6-count lawsuit claims false arrest and imprisonment, conspiracy, and malicious prosecution. It seeks a jury trial and more than $5 million in compensatory damages, more than $5 million in punitive damages, attorney's fees, and court costs. The Will County, Illinois Sheriff's Office says the investigation into the shootings was followed to the letter of the law. Since Brian's arrest, he has suffered from various serious psychological and emotional issues stemming from what occurred to him. He has sought professional services to help him get through what has occurred. Brian Dorian is a police officer and has stated in interviews that as a police officer, you gather evidence to support your charges. You don't charge and then go gather evidence to support them. Over the past year or so, Brian has sat back and tried to reestablish his life and gather the broken pieces from this horrific situation. He is currently back on the Linwood, Illinois police force. In October 2011, his lawsuit was filed with the United States District Court. Today, we will discuss the issues of every American's civil rights and what to do if you are falsely accused of a crime. Some of the issues we will cover are: what exactly are your civil rights? How are these rights protected? Can I sue whenever somebody interferes with one of my civil rights? When is a governmental employee acting under color of law? Who can sue? Who can be sued? Can you sue a government official for a subordinates act? What is immunity and how does it affect my ability to sue? What types of remedies are available if I sue? Can you sue a law enforcement official for violating your civil rights? Why are cases against law enforcement officials so difficult? Is it possible to recover attorney's fees? Is it possible to receive punitive damages? Do prisoners have civil rights? Can they successfully sue for violations? Today, the Insider Exclusive takes an inside look at the law firms of Gregory Kulis and Associates and Carlson, Zelazo, Oedeker, and how Greg Kulis's amazing courtroom skills and headline-grabbing success rate continue to provide their clients with the results they need and the results they deserve. Making sure juries understand how violations of your civil rights can truly devastate a person's personal and professional life. Remember, Greg and Dave won't be outworked, and they will not rest until justice is done for their client. This is the Insider Exclusive, live from outside Chicago in Joliet, Illinois. It is my great pleasure to introduce Greg Kulis and Dave Carlson to the show. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Greg, tell us a little bit about your firm. What does your firm practice primarily?
Well, our firm concentrates in the area of police misconduct. By that, I mean we represent victims of police misconduct such as false arrest, excessive force, malicious prosecution, where an individual may have been their rights, constitutional rights, were violated for and they were illegally charged for a crime which they did not commit.
Right. And Dave, your firm primarily specializes in criminal law, doesn't it?
Well, we focus on litigation, criminal and civil. We're all former prosecutors, and myself personally, I focus a lot on the criminal side of things.
Today we have a case, and it's the strange story of Brian Dorian, where you represented him criminally, correct?
Correct.
And you are representing him in a civil action, a 1983 civil rights action that's currently pending in court. Tell our audience, first you, Greg, a little bit about this case.
Well, 2 years ago, in October of 2010, a string of shootings took place in Indiana and the south suburbs of Chicago, and it was called the honeybee killings.
And for our audience, why was it called the honeybee killings?
Because the perpetrator purportedly had conversations with the victims about raising honeybees.
This is very strange, isn't it? I mean, you know, while he was shooting them, or what?
Prior to the shootings, he would have conversations and engage in conversations, and then ultimately shoot these people.
Yeah.
But one night, Brian's home was raided by a SWAT team.
Yes.
And he was taken into custody. Brian Dorian was a police officer and still is a police officer in Linwood, Illinois.
Yeah.
And on that evening, he was taken into custody and told he was the honeybee killer.
Right.
He was ultimately charged and held in jail for 6 days. His picture was plastered all over the networks, front pages of all the newspapers, where the state's attorney of Will County and the sheriff of Will County basically said, "This is the killer. We have the killer.
Yeah.
He's a Linwood police officer, and he's our man."
Now, Dave, how could they possibly make this mistake? Because it was a huge mistake.
Well, I think one of the things that Greg touched on was the sheriff, and the state's attorney, the two elected officials. For whatever reason, it was getting close to election time. I think they felt a tremendous amount of pressure to do something.
But I mean, to arrest a cop who has a stellar record, right?
Yeah.
This is insane, isn't it?
It is. It is.
Now, what has happened? Brian was eventually released, correct?
Brian cooperated fully with authorities.
And he even told them, he gave an account of where he was during the time of the killings, right?
He said he was at one point, he said, "I was on my computer at home."
Which he could prove.
And in fact, that's what we did as his criminal lawyers at the time. We went in and told the prosecutors, "Hey, you got the wrong guy, and here's why." And they said, "No, we've got the right guy. We know it. We've got it." Well, clearly they were wrong.
Now let's talk about this, because you told me something a little bit before the show about having the right guy. Did they not come to him when they realized, while he's incarcerated, they realized that they had the wrong guy and asked him to stay in jail a little bit longer?
My understanding was that they admitted that we know you're not the killer.
Yeah, but kept him in jail.
But would you stick around in jail while we continue our investigation?
Is this true?
It was absolutely one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard, that their thought was this would be a good ruse to catch the real killer.
Yeah.
They knew it, and they knew that the real killer was still out there, and they thought the best way to deal with it was to keep him there, keep Brian there. It shocked us. As I said, we were all prosecutors.
Right.
The thought that they would make that proposal, we looked at each other and thought, wow, this is unbelievable.
Now, this can be documented. Brian's going to be with us today, but I mean, this is something that was said directly to him, correct?
It was said directly to us.
And the lawyers?
We
you?
were sitting there. And
Are you serious? While they keep him locked up?
Absolutely.
I mean, this is insane. When we have a case like this, what are some of the issues that you have to prove, the civil rights case?
Well, we have to show that there was no probable cause to arrest him and charge him.
Yeah.
They had some evidence, clear evidence, that the vehicle that was involved in his shootings was not the vehicle that Brian owns. Yeah. Brian could also explain where he was during one of the shootings. His physical description didn't match up. There are some people who called. In fact, there was drawings in the newspapers about the honeybee killer, and there were people that called up and said, "That's not the guy.
Yeah.
Brian's not the guy I see on the newspaper is not the killer."
Right. They finally nailed the right guy, Gary Amaya, correct?
Actually, a good Samaritan got him.
Yeah. He was killed in another shooting, wasn't he?
In an attempt to harm other people.
Right.
A good Samaritan actually killed him with his own gun.
Really?
And thank God for that.
We have Brian and his fiancée with us today. We're going to bring them on right now, and after we talk with them, we want to have you both come back on to discuss some of the civil rights issues, everybody's civil rights when you're falsely accused of something. So let's bring on Brian and Alexandra right now. It is my great pleasure to introduce Brian Dorian and his fiancée, Alexandra Mulchin. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
When I first heard about this case, I was just amazed that here you are, an outstanding police officer, and you were falsely accused. Tell our audience what that felt like.
Helpless, completely helpless.
You were in jail 6 days.
5 or 6.
Yeah.
23 hours a day in a box. Being a policeman, you're used to helping other people and taking control of situations, and here I have to rely on the outside world to help me because I couldn't help myself. Begged my lawyer to come over out of his day for 5 minutes just to get me out of the box. The phone calls that I was allowed to make, to my family, and on one hand, trying to think like a police officer. Is there something else that I missed? Is there something else that I didn't tell them? Is there something else that I overlooked that could help me in my predicament?
Because they arrested you at midnight, is it?
They came to my house the night of the 7th, maybe about 11:45, so almost at midnight. And at that time, of course...
They had a whole SWAT team and the whole 9 yards?
Yeah, unknown to me, she had just left my house maybe 10:15. We were having dinner, and I'm sitting there folding laundry. Told her, make sure you text me when you get home. She had to be home for her son because her ex-husband was, watching them.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not hearing nothing, not hearing nothing, not hearing nothing. Little did I know, they yanked her over at gunpoint, took her in.
Really?
And then they came to my house.
And were you locked up too? Or you were just at the police station?
No, I was almost home. I was driving on a highway, and I did notice a car pull next to me, and I thought it was a group of kids, and they looked over. So I just kept driving, talking to my sister on the phone, and went the normal route that I went, and I was right on the border of Linwood and Dyer, Indiana. And I end up stopping at this stoplight, and then they cut me off. I was still on the phone with my sister. I threw the phone down, knew to put my hands up just from being with Brian and what the procedure is, and had the guns on me. So I just did what I needed to do, got out of the car. They took me to the substation. They questioned me. Just the fact that I left Brian's house and just the circumstances of the whole situation.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not really thinking the whys and the hows and things like that,
Right.
but it was a nightmare. It was surreal. It was a bad movie.
Right. I watched a newsreel, we started it with a show, where your mom basically says, you've never been in trouble in your life. Here you are, a police officer. This must be a nightmare to you. I mean, it must be like a sci-fi movie where they're just yanked you out of, because how could they possibly think this?
Completely helpless.
Now, I understand that towards the end of your 6-day incarceration, either the sheriff or the state attorney came to you and said, we know this is not you. We want you to stay in jail one more day so we can actually use it as a ploy to find the real person. Is that right?
I don't know if my lawyers wanted that out now, but it was relayed to me. They didn't come to me. They pulled my lawyers aside.
Yeah.
It was Tuesday night. And I'm sitting there in a conference room, finally out of a cell, and I had my lawyers around, and, earlier that day, the charges were officially announced to me.
Yeah.
In court, led in shackles on a side room.
Right.
All my supporters were there in court, which I didn't see them. I had no idea.
Yeah.
I'm on the phone with my mom, her, and my lawyers with their visits are telling me, Brian, you got so much support out there. And I didn't know what they were talking about. And Dave Carlson is telling me, we've never seen this much support for a cop before. Mm-hmm. They came in and they said, you're not going to believe this. And I said, what? And they said, Glasgow and Copus have an offer for you. And again, I'm not in my right mind, And they said, laughingly, they want you to sit in the shitter for another week while they try and draw the real killer out.
Another week?
Yeah. And the sheriff would even leave my door open let me have alcohol, whatever, something to that effect. And I said, okay. And my lawyer said, are you effing nuts? And I said, won't it help get this psychopath off the streets? Mm-hmm. He goes, quit thinking like a cop. He goes, what they did to you? He goes, no. He goes, they know they messed up, and they're trying to cover their tracks now. Right. And this would be doing them a favor. You don't have to do it. And thank God my lawyers were there, because I wasn't in the right frame of mind. My first thought, and again, when I was first told that they actually thought I did this, and they were charging me, I'm telling my lawyers, you need to protect these gunshot victims. If this psychopath comes back, they feel like they're safe, that he could come after them. Again, we didn't know motive, anything.
That was very courageous and brave of you to continue to sacrifice yourself so they could catch the killer, because you were thinking like a cop. I mean, I have to hand that to you.
The courageous people were the ones that got shot, and they have to put up with this every day.
Let me ask you, how has this changed your viewpoint of the justice system?
I view the justice system, at least in Will County, with a lot more trepidation and question everything. And I've had several, whether it's my neighbors, friends that have reached out to me, strangers that have reached out to me, and the first thing they say is, man, if they didn't even take their time with a cop and did this, we're scared.
Right.
And I've said this from the get-go. If the whole world is watching their every move, and they did this to me, how do they act when the world's not watching their every move to keep them in check? How many others? Do you really think I'm the only one that sat behind bars innocently? How many others are sitting right now for the same half-ass investigation they did with me?
Right. Well, this is the reason we're doing this show, so the whole world can see this. And we thank you very much, and I thank you very much for taking your time to be with us today.
You're welcome.
Now, in this particular case, you're filed a Civil Rights Act.
Correct.
For our audience who really might not know what your civil rights are, what are your civil rights?
Under the Fourth Amendment, you have a right to be free from unlawful arrest and detention charges. In this case, Dave came to us and said, I've got a guy, as you've seen in the paper, had nothing to do with this crime.
Yeah.
And prosecutors and police departments, they're supposed to gather evidence to determine whether there was probable cause to arrest and charge.
Right.
In this case, I think the opposite was done. They arrested and charged and then started looking for evidence.
Yeah. As a former prosecutor, when you discovered, and you discovered rather quickly, that your client, Brian, had nothing to do with this, did you pick up the phone call and call the prosecutor and said, what the heck are you doing?
Yeah.
And what was his answer?
They had the right guy.
And did you say, are you insane?
I said, well, listen to what we have to say.
Yeah.
And I think it was within a matter of hours after we had a talk that they were so convinced that they had the right guy that all of a sudden they weren't.
Yeah.
And here we are today.
But it'd be wonderful when you win the case to have them issue an apology in the headline, and plaster that all over as much as they covered the media. I hope they do.
I think one of the things that bothers me the most is that the state's attorney's office here spent more time after the fact justifying what they did, even though they were absolutely wrong.
Yeah.
They have really done a disservice by doing that.
CYA, and that's why people don't believe in a lot of authority these days, because you do have these people with personal agendas who are unwilling to admit when they're wrong. I want to thank both of you for spending time with us today. You're doing a terrific job, and we want to know the outcome of this case when it happens. Thank you. Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.